Karen's hands shoved mercilessly against my disabled daughter's small shoulders as she was dragged off the school van, her backpack ripping open and spilling books, pencils, and her cherished stuffed animal across the hard pavement, while children inside the bus stared in stunned silence. The driver froze, torn between duty and fear, but Karen's shrill voice drowned out reason, spitting venom about rules and order as my little girl's body crumpled on the curb, her leg braces clattering against the concrete. Gasps from neighbors echoed like a cruel chorus, yet no one stepped forward, their hesitation allowing this humiliation to deepen, the weight of injustice pressing harder than the ground my daughter trembled upon. She sobbed not just from pain, but from the unbearable shame of being treated as less than human, stripped of dignity by a woman whose cruelty knew no boundaries. Rage ignited in my chest, searing hotter, with every second as I realized this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of hatred, targeted at my child's vulnerability. The world seemed to spin slower as my daughter's tear-streaked face lifted toward the bus, her eyes begging for anyone to defend her, while Karen stood triumphantly, convinced she had won some twisted battle. That moment seared itself into my memory forever, the spark that turned grief into fury and set in motion a storm Karen never could have imagined. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more Karen stories. Before that day shattered everything, our lives were built on a quiet rhythm of love, resilience, and simple joys, the kind of life that felt ordinary to outsiders but meant everything to us. My daughter, though disabled, was the heart of our home, her smile lighting up rooms, her determination reminding us every day that strength is not defined by physical ability but by courage. She wore her leg braces proudly, not as a symbol of limitation, but as proof that nothing could keep her from living fully, from chasing laughter, friendship, and the kind of childhood every parent hopes their child can have. Each morning, the highlight of her day was the arrival of the bright yellow school van. She would wait eagerly by the door, clutching her little backpack, waving excitedly to the driver who always greeted her with kindness and to the classmates who cheered her on as she climbed aboard. For her, that van wasn't just transportation, it was independence, inclusion, and belonging. My wife and I often stood by the window watching her go, hearts swelling with pride, grateful that our daughter, despite her challenges, was growing in confidence. Our neighborhood appeared serene. Green lawns stretching neatly in rows, children's laughter echoing on weekends, families gathering for cookouts under the soft glow of string lights. I balanced the intensity of my role as a federal judge with the tranquility of home, where justice was measured not in rulings but in bedtime stories, shared meals, and the wagging tail of our family dog. Yes, there were HOA rules and petty notices about grass length or where the trash can stood, but they felt like background noise compared to the warmth inside our home. We had created a sanctuary where love overshadowed every difficulty, where my daughter's laughter was proof that peace was possible. I never imagined that a single act of cruelty could unravel it all, that someone as venomous as Karen would look at that same joy and see not innocence to be cherished, but weakness to be attacked. The storm that would one day explode into outright cruelty began with whispers, complaints, and the sharp sting of disdain masked as concern. At first, it was Karen's disapproving stares from her porch as the school van stopped near her driveway, her eyes narrowing like each squeak of the brakes was a personal attack on her perfect, manicured existence. She began with passive-aggressive comments, snide remarks to other neighbors about how that van blocked the road too long, or how some parents shouldn't burden the community with their problems. Soon, those whispers evolved into letters to the HOA, neatly typed accusations claiming the van violated neighborhood policies, that it disrupted the flow of traffic, even though everyone knew the stop lasted no more than 2 minutes. What enraged her most wasn't the van. It was my daughter, her disability a target for Karen's venom, her determination misinterpreted as disturbance. She once cornered the driver, wagging her finger as she demanded the van change its stop location, insisting that children like mine should be picked up out of sight where they wouldn't inconvenience others. When the driver refused, citing policy and compassion, Karen's fury escalated. She began documenting every morning with her phone, lurking behind blinds and bushes, filming as though my daughter's bravery in climbing the steps with her braces was some kind of neighborhood scandal. She confronted my wife with icy arrogance, saying in a low hiss that kids like yours should be homeschooled anyway. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a van, it was about dehumanizing my daughter, about stripping her of dignity in a place where she should have been safe. I tried at first to take the higher road, reminding myself that people like Karen thrived on attention, but the complaints became relentless, the venom sharper, and the whispers began spreading through the neighborhood, twisting strangers into skeptics. Some neighbors stayed kind, offering quiet support, but others avoided eye contact, unwilling to cross Karen's wrath. I watched as the fragile peace of our community cracked, every letter from the HOA, another blade digging deeper into our family. Karen had chosen her battlefield, and her weapon wasn't just rules or paperwork, it was cruelty itself. And though I held my ground, part of me knew she was building towards something far darker, something that wouldn't stop at words or policies. She wanted to break us, and she was only just beginning to reveal how far she was willing to go. The morning of the attack began with the same familiar routine that had carried us through countless school days, a rhythm that felt safe, comforting, and unshakable. My daughter waiting by the door with her backpack neatly packed, her braces buckled tight, her face lit with anticipation as the hum of the school van grew closer, while my wife and I stood nearby, smiling at the simple joy she found in independence. But that morning, as the van pulled up and its doors folded open with their usual hiss, the air seemed different, heavy, as if warning us that something unnatural was about to unravel. Karen appeared before anyone could move, storming across the street with her arms crossed and fury burning in her eyes, her voice already rising before she even reached the van. She shouted at the driver to stop, claiming the vehicle was trespassing, that it had no right to be in front of her property, her words slicing the morning calm into shreds of hostility. The driver, stunned but professional, reminded her that this was a designated stop approved by the school, but Karen wasn't listening. Her rage had boiled past reason. My daughter hesitated at the curb, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack, uncertainty flickering across her face, but before I could step forward, Karen's hands shot out. With a force fueled not by logic, but by hatred, she yanked my daughter off the bottom step of the van, her body jolting as her braces clattered against the metal edge before she toppled onto the pavement, books spilling from her bag like broken pieces of her pride. The gasp that escaped her lips as she hit the ground was the sound of innocence shattering, and her tears spilled faster than I could even process what had just happened. The driver jumped down, trying to intervene, but Karen planted herself like a barricade, shrieking that she was protecting the neighborhood from hazards, her voice sharp and venomous, uncaring of the sobbing child crumpled at her feet. My daughter's hands trembled as she tried to gather her books, her stuffed animal lying in the gutter, dirt smearing its once bright fabric. Other children on the bus pressed their faces to the windows, wide-eyed and terrified, while whispers rose among the neighbors who had stepped outside at the sound of shouting. Some clutched their coffee mugs in disbelief, others whispered nervously, but none stepped forward to stop her. Fear of Karen's wrath keeping them frozen on their porches while cruelty unfolded in front of them. My wife's scream split the air as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside our daughter, wrapping her arms around her fragile body, tears streaming down her own face. My chest burned with rage, so fierce I could barely breathe, my fists tightening as every instinct screamed at me to end this, to drag Karen away, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted. But I stood rooted, staring at the spectacle of a grown woman towering over a sobbing disabled child, convinced she had won some kind of twisted victory. And then came the betrayal from the very people sworn to protect. The police arrived, sirens briefly silencing the chaos, but even as they questioned Karen, her crocodile tears began to flow, her voice trembling as she spun her lie, that my daughter had stumbled, that she had tried to help, that the bus driver was reckless and she had stepped in to ensure safety. The officers looked uncomfortable, jotting down notes, their eyes darting between my weeping child and the neighbor who stood before them with feigned innocence. I shouted, I demanded they see the truth, that they speak to the witnesses, that they consider the bruises on my daughter's knees and the red marks where Karen's fingers had gripped too tightly. But their response was weak, hollow assurances that the matter would be reviewed. Reviewed. That word felt like acid in my veins, a dismissal of the cruelty that had just unfolded in plain sight, as if my daughter's humiliation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience on their morning shift. Karen, emboldened by their hesitation, smirked as she stepped back toward her house, her eyes meeting mine with a silent message. She believed she was untouchable. That night, our home was filled with silence, broken only by the soft sobs of my daughter as she clutched her stuffed animal tighter than ever, asking why someone would hate her enough to hurt her. My wife and I had no answer, only the unbearable truth that evil sometimes wears the face of a neighbor. As I sat there, rage coursing through me, I realized that this was no longer just about an HOA feud, no longer about petty rules or whispered complaints. This was about dignity, humanity, and justice. Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and though she thought her lies would shield her, she had made the gravest mistake of her life. She had chosen to wage war against my family, against my child, and she had no idea who she was truly dealing with. That was the night I stopped grieving and started planning, the moment when pain transformed into resolve, and the path toward her downfall became clearer than ever. The days after the attack twisted into something darker than I could have ever imagined, not because the truth was unclear, but because Karen's lies spread faster than the bruises on my daughter's body could fade. Instead of shame or remorse, Karen marched into the world with smug defiance, her voice louder and sharper, carrying her poisonous version of events like a banner. She told anyone who would listen that my daughter had fallen on her own, that the bus driver was careless, and that she had stepped in only to prevent an accident. To my disgust, some neighbors nodded along, not because they believed her, but because it was easier than crossing her. Others, who had watched with wide eyes from their porches, chose silence, their fear of Karen's retaliation outweighing their duty to speak the truth. And then came the letters from the HOA, thick envelopes stamped with authority, filled with accusations of endangering the community, allowing unsafe conditions, and even creating liability for the neighborhood because of my daughter's disability. Each word was a knife twisting deeper, a reminder that the very people who should have condemned Karen were instead twisting their petty rules into weapons against us. The school board, too, faltered. We sat in meetings where officials shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their eyes avoiding mine, as they explained that while they regretted what happened, they couldn't take sides in neighbor disputes. They suggested changing the van's stop, moving it blocks away, effectively punishing my daughter for being the victim of cruelty. My wife broke down in tears as she asked them how they could allow a disabled child to be humiliated and endangered, only to receive rehearsed apologies and hollow promises that they'd look into it. Karen, meanwhile, continued to strut across the neighborhood like a conqueror, her laughter carrying across lawns as if mocking the very idea of accountability. She began attending HOA meetings with renewed vigor, pointing fingers, demanding new policies about bus routes, and fueling whispers that we were the ones destabilizing the community. The betrayal was suffocating. As a federal judge, I had spent years believing in the system, defending the idea that justice, though sometimes slow, was inevitable. Yet here I was, watching the system bend to lies, cowardice, and bureaucracy, my daughter's tears dismissed as collateral damage in the name of convenience. At home, the weight of it crushed us. My daughter asked why Karen hated her, why adults who saw the truth stayed quiet, why the people who promised to protect her turned their backs. I had no easy answer, only the bitter truth that injustice often hides behind polite smiles and official stamps. My wife moved through each day with rage bubbling just beneath the surface, her trust in neighbors shattered, her once bright spirit dulled by the sheer cruelty of it all. But within me, something hardened. The anger that had once threatened to consume me transformed into resolve, cold and sharp. Karen thought she had won, That by twisting the truth and hiding behind HOA bylaws and cowardly officials, she had silenced us. But she had made a mistake she couldn't take back. She had underestimated me. She saw only a grieving father, a broken family, a child she thought she could bully into silence. What she didn't see was the man who sat on the federal bench, the man who had dismantled liars and manipulators far more cunning than her, the man who had built his life on exposing corruption and defending the innocent. The injustice cut deep, but it also lit a fire that would not burn out until Karen faced consequences she couldn't escape. In those quiet nights, as my daughter slept fitfully and my wife clung to me with trembling hands, I began to see the path forward. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but I knew exactly what I needed to do. The system may have failed us in those first days, but I would use that same system to bring her down. And when it happened, when the truth could no longer be buried under her lies, Karen would finally understand what real justice feels like. Rage without direction is wasted, and I refuse to let mine burn into nothing but bitterness. If Karen thought intimidation and lies would break us, she had miscalculated. What she had done was awaken the part of me that spent decades dismantling deception and holding the guilty accountable. I started quietly, methodically, the way I would prepare for any case that demanded precision. Every piece of evidence became a weapon, every record another nail in the coffin of her arrogance. I collected witness statements from the few neighbors who still had courage, coaxing them not with anger, but with reminders of what silence enables. The bus driver, shaken and furious, agreed to write a detailed report of that morning, describing exactly how Karen forced my daughter off the step. And then came the breakthrough: security cameras. Several homes had systems that captured fragments of the incident, and while not everyone was willing to share, persistence paid off. Footage surfaced, grainy but undeniable, showing Karen blocking the bus and dragging my daughter to the pavement. That evidence alone was a dagger through the heart of her narrative. But I didn't stop there. I turned my attention to the HOA, combing through bylaws, meeting minutes, and financial records. It didn't take long to uncover what I suspected. Karen wasn't just a loudmouth with too much free time, she was entangled in the rot of the board itself. There were discrepancies in budgets, unexplained fees charged to residents, and contracts awarded to companies connected to her friends. I built a timeline, connecting dots with the precision of a surgeon, creating a picture that not only exposed her cruelty, but tied her to corruption that could dismantle her carefully constructed shield. Late nights at my desk blurred into dawns, my study lit by the glow of a desk lamp and the quiet hum of determination. My wife would sometimes peek in, her eyes tired but filled with trust, and she'd whisper, "Bring her down," and I would nod because I had no intention of doing anything less. Meanwhile, I let Karen believe she was winning. I endured her smug smirks during HOA meetings, paid the ridiculous fines they levied against me without protest, and allowed her to think my silence was defeat. Every insult she hurled, every lie she spread only built her arrogance higher, which made her eventual fall inevitable and all the more satisfying. In reality, she was walking straight into the web I spun around her, a trap of her own making, built from her greed, cruelty, and corruption. I wasn't simply preparing to expose her attack on my daughter, I was preparing to strip her of everything she thought made her untouchable. By the time I was finished, I had assembled more than a case. I had built an unbreakable wall of truth that not even Karen's lies could climb. Witnesses, footage, financial misconduct, harassment reports, it was all there, airtight and irrefutable. She believed she had silenced us, but what she had truly done was give me the fuel to ensure her downfall would echo louder than her cruelty ever had. The only thing left was to choose the moment to strike, and when it came, Karen would learn that justice does not forget, and neither do I. The day Karen finally faced the truth was a day that cracked the mask she had worn for so long, exposing not the powerful neighbor she pretended to be, but a trembling coward cornered by her own lies. She walked into the courthouse with her usual arrogance, shoulders squared, lips twisted in that smug smile she wore like armor, clutching folders of fabricated complaints and hollow defenses. But as the proceedings began, that confidence began to wilt. One by one, the witnesses came forward, neighbors she had bullied into silence, now standing tall, recounting her threats and her venomous words about my daughter. The bus driver's testimony cut through her lies with the sharp edge of truth, describing in detail how she had blocked the van and yanked my child to the ground. And then, when the grainy footage from the security cameras played, showing her grabbing my daughter and dragging her off the step, the last flicker of composure drained from her face. Gasps rippled through the room, whispers buzzing like bees, and Karen's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist. But it wasn't just about that morning, it was about everything. The financial documents I had uncovered revealed her hand in misused HOA funds, exposing her corruption in front of an audience that once feared her. Every page turned was another weight crushing her arrogance. She tried to speak, her voice cracking as she spun excuses about being misunderstood, about only wanting safety, but no one was listening anymore. Her words were nothing compared to the undeniable mountain of evidence stacked against her. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder when the verdict came down. Guilty of assault, guilty of harassment, guilty of fraud tied to her role in the HOA. The sentence was severe, stripping her of freedom, status, and the illusion of control she had wielded for years. As officers stepped forward to place her in handcuffs, she turned her eyes toward me, wide and desperate, only now realizing the magnitude of her mistake. She had believed I was just a neighbor, just another man she could intimidate. She never imagined that I was the very authority she could never escape, a federal judge who had patiently, methodically built the case that would destroy her. And as she was led away, her shoulders sagging under the weight of justice, I felt no triumph, only the cold satisfaction of truth finally prevailing. Karen's downfall was complete, and this time there was no smirk left on her lips. When the echoes of the gavel faded and Karen was taken away in chains, the air in that courtroom felt lighter, as though years of her poison had finally been lifted from our lives. Yet, victory did not feel like celebration, it felt like closure. No punishment could erase the image of my daughter trembling on the pavement. No sentence could restore the innocence that had been stolen from her that morning. But justice had spoken, and the world now knew the truth Karen had tried so hard to bury. My daughter, once haunted by fear, slowly began to rebuild her courage. Each morning she climbed back onto that school van, not as a victim, but as a survivor, her resilience shining brighter than the cruelty meant to break her. My wife and I watched her reclaim her dignity step by step, and in those moments, we understood that Karen's hatred had failed. It had failed to silence us, failed to divide us, failed to conquer the spirit of a child stronger than any bully. The neighborhood changed, too. Where silence once fed fear, people found their voices again. Neighbors who had looked away now stood united, determined never to let cruelty go unanswered in their community again. The HOA's corruption was dismantled, its hollow authority exposed, and in its place, a fragile but real sense of accountability began to take root. For me, this chapter became more than personal grief, it became a reminder of why justice matters. It isn't just about punishment, it's about protecting the vulnerable, standing against cruelty, and proving that truth, no matter how long it takes, will always rise. Karen thought she had won when she pushed my daughter down, but in the end, she only buried herself under the weight of her own hate. And now, I leave you with this. What would you have done if it was your child who suffered at the hands of someone like Karen? Tell me in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this must be heard, don't forget to subscribe for more Karen stories. Because as long as people like her exist, their downfall deserves to be told. I think you are enjoying my all HOA disabled stories, so please comment me what you want for next topic, subscribe for more amazing videos.